With some, they're coming out. Whatever. You guys have done.
Really not.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
My first year was where I also have they have interesting
Good afternoon, everyone. So it is 2:30, and I would like to start the next session in a minute time. So please be seated. And our next talk is unlocking the power of knowledge graphs in data isolation. JPMorgan. So the Matthew Rawlings and Richard Beatch. In fact, Beatch. I apologize for mispronouncing your name, but I'm going to give 1 or 2 minutes till everybody settles in and please be seated, and there are some bench areas for you to sit in the back. All right, so I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speaker here today in present, Richard. I'll go as the like that way. That was easier for me to pronounce your name. And he is the executive director, Commons and Vocabularies at JPMorgan Chase and Company. His biography, I'm just going to go and explain that he's a senior leader in metadata and data governance with the emphasis on semantic technology. And Richard is currently serving as the metadata best practice and standards evangelist. That's great. That's great. And with the consumer and community banking division of the JPMorgan Chase Company. I just got to know Matthew is not here present today, so Richard is doing the presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over the digital podium to Richard.
Everyone hear me? Sounds like I'm coming through. So yeah, thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it. So Matthew is unable to join us today, which is unfortunate. He sends his regrets, but we'll muddle through, I'm confident. First disclaimer, I work for a giant bank, therefore I need to say this. What I'm going to say today is my views, not the views of JPMorgan in any official manner whatsoever. Have to say that, or the corporate communications folks basically fire me. So noted. That did not work. What did I do wrong?
You hit the blackout button.
There we go. All right. So what do we want from a knowledge base? Well, ideally, we want the knowledge base to contain all our data, right? So that way we can have all the relevant data in one place. We can look across the knowledge base, find what we want. Well, why would we want to do that? Well, we all know why we want to do that. We're here, right? Right. We could cross-reference the data and say, hey, let's find the data point that represents a specific start date, particular type of transaction in a specific geographical area, initiated by people between the ages of 18 and 35. Now, we can start targeting credit cards at those people. That's cool. Well, guess what? We just violated a whole mess of privacy rules, right? it's gonna be a big problem. So we can't do that. There are lots of places, or cases rather. Now I can't operate this. There we go. Where we just can't access the data, right? There are golden source restrictions. There's upstream databases, which we just don't have access to for a variety of reasons. We might work for a government agency and, you know, we don't have top secret security clearance. We can't look at this. We can know that there is data about this, but we can't look at it. We still might want to find out that it's there, but if we can't look at it, how do we do that? We can't expose it in the knowledge base. Access restrictions, privacy. Obviously in a bank, consumer bank, lots of privacy information. Think about the kind of information a bank knows about you. You get a 1099 in the mail every year from a bank, I'm guessing. What's on that 1099? Your address, your name, your social security number. Guess what? That's not stuff we can put on the side of the building without getting in a lot of trouble. You can't put it on the side of the building. Chances are we can't expose it in the knowledge base that everyone in the company can look at. So how do we do this? Yeah, not pointing in the right direction. Well, we already know the answer, right? It's metadata. Metadata is the solution to this problem. Of course it is, except where it isn't. So there happens to be an outstanding W3C standard called DCAT, the Data Catalog Vocabulary. So what DCAT does, for those of you who aren't too familiar, is it talks about data publishing. So not getting data into the database, data modeling, but data publishing. So you have your data upstream in n number of databases, right? And what you want to do is you want to say, okay, I'm going to pick and choose data from these various databases, assemble them into a data set. And then, so I'm going to conceptually organize a new data set. Then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to deliver this data set in 3 different ways. I'm going to deliver it as a CSV file in this particular cloud environment. I'm going to deliver it as XML in this other environment, which may or may not be on the cloud. And I'm going to deliver it as a, take your pick, right? HTML for some strange reason in this other environment. Fine. Each of those are what we call in the DCAT world distribution. So we have the data set, conceptual, here are the columns I want. Distribution, here's the physical manifestation that's going to land in a place. It's going to have a way of referencing it to pull it back and so on. Okay, awesome. I might even put an API in front of one of these things and have a data service. I can define the data service. DCAT provides a vocabulary. It cross-references other vocabularies to describe these things. So what you can do with DCAT is instead of embedding the stuff in the data, you're going to release a CSV file. You're probably not going to have URIs in it, for example. What you can do is you can create metadata artifacts that describe the data set, the distribution, the data service. Well, that sounds great. But it doesn't get you very far. What do we know about a distribution using DCAT? Well, what DCAT gives us is the ability to say, okay, here's the title of this distribution. The title of the distribution looks remarkably like the title of the data set, typically. It doesn't have to, but typically it does. Here's the 3-4 sentence description of the distribution, which again, tends to look remarkably like the description of the data set. Here's some stuff about the distribution that's particular to the distribution. It's 10 gigabytes. It's going to be in this cloud environment in maybe this specific S3 bucket or something. Okay, fantastic. Custom ID, what's that? I don't know. That's a column header from a database. What database? I don't know, the one upstream that I pulled this from. What's cust ID mean? I don't know. Maybe I should find the DBA who did this in the first place. Maybe they can tell me what it means. Well, that's not a very effective way to figure out what data I need, right? And if all I have is like a 2-3 sentence description of the distribution and a title, I'm not going to know what's going on here. Now, if I happen to know who to bug and say, hey, Scott, what did you mean with WT_QU? And Scott might go, I don't know. I built that database 5 years ago. How am I supposed to know, right? Or maybe Scott does a better job because he's Scott. He does a great job. Scott and I used to be colleagues. So full disclosure, Scott and I used to be colleagues. So Scott would actually say, no, here's what it means. Well, your guess is as good as mine. I made this stuff up. I have no idea what it means because I just put it here to make the point, right? So what we need to do is we need to look deeper than just the description of the distribution, and we need to look at the shape of the data. So suddenly I'm no longer in DCAT land, right? I need to dig deeper. But turns out it's not that difficult. We look at the column, we say, okay, here's a column, WGT underscore ORI. Again, I can call up Scott and he's gonna go, yeah, I've got nothing, buddy, sorry. Okay, but when I'm developing these things, I might be able to do something a little bit more intelligent. I may not know what the values are. I just put the X's there because it's blocked to me. But I can, without violating top secret clearance, without violating customer privacy rules, I can say something about WGT underscore ORI. I can say, well, hold on, Mr. and Mrs. Data Publisher, what's the human readable name for this column? So we don't have to do WGT underscore ORI. We can say, oh, okay, it's a widget origin location. You can tell I made this up. You can also tell that what I sent to corporate communications got edited. So my apologies there. In any case, so that's the widget origin location. What's the description? Oh, this field specifies the US state in which the widget reference was produced. All right, cool. What's its property IRI? Whoa, hold on. Property IRI. We're talking about ontology all of a sudden? Well, yeah, because we can say, look, this actually, everything in this column is an instance of, in this case, schema address region from schema.org. Right? And then we can say, oh, what's the data type? Well, if it's schema address region, we can cross-reference and say that's XSD string. Now we have some built-in data validation too. That's cool. Granted, it's a string, not really good validation, but still. And we can actually say, oh, the domain, if we're looking up schema and we look up schema address region, we say, oh, the domain is a defined region. We're told that if we just look at how schema is structured. Now we know something about that column, and we know something about every item in that column without ever having exposed the value, which means Scott's social security number never made it to the forefront. We have a column for the social security number. We know it's filled with social security numbers. We have no idea whose is there. We have no idea what it is, but we know there's social security numbers. Now we know something more about the distribution. That helps us focus our discoverability. So, what does it get us? Already covered this basically. Property IRI gives us a standardized reference to a property defined in a common vocabulary. We can use schema. Those of you that are familiar with schema know that it's very general, except in a few weird places where it's remarkably particular, but we'll leave that aside for a minute. Apparently, if you're in the hotel industry, it's really useful. In any event, when you're not in the hotel industry, it's rather general. So maybe it stops at things like address region, right? Or maybe it stops at things like postal code. Fine, fair enough. There's nothing stopping someone from developing their own ontology that actually extends, maybe that's not the right word, but supplements schema for your domain. Easy enough. You just need a group of ontologists who can do that. When these are defined, you get a reusable reference. You get constraints on syntax for validation. And you get a clear anchor into a well-defined class in a shared ontology. Right? In this case, it's a schema one. If you develop your own ontology, you may be able to have a very clean, precisely defined class. The financial industry, you may make reference to some good work, such as the work that Lisa does with 5.0 or whatever, right? You suddenly have this additional context. So in addition to having metadata artifacts for dataset, distribution, data service, you get this additional metadata artifact that sort of hangs off of the distribution, if you will, that says distribution shape. Why does this matter? So when I was at Bloomberg in the previous life, not that long ago, it became really popular to talk about the farification of data. They probably still talk about making the data fair. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and interoperability got truncated, I'm sorry. This is what I get for letting corporate communications edit my stuff. Any case, findable. How can you discover the data? Well, if you think about what we've done here, in addition to having this description, hey, this data set covers the manufacture of widgets by a industrial company that in turn sells those widgets to a defense supplier, top secret stuff, can't expose the data, right? Well, instead of just having that to support your findability, you can now say, well, hold on, let's see all of the widget suppliers who supply things to not just defense contractors, but airplane defense contractors who have origins in some specific state. Can I expose the data to say, hey, this one came from Nebraska? No. But I can still find the data sets that have those correlations in it. Once I found those data sets, I can then turn around and say, hey, start the bureaucratic process. Can I have permission? If you have a critical business need for permission, you can typically get it, right? I don't know how government top secret stuff works. I shouldn't say that, right? It also supports accessibility, right? Because once you have this data once you get your hands on the data, you know what the columns are, you know the IRIs associated with it. You can actually start accessing these things via the IRIs consistently, right? So instead of having these different columns as the sole identifier that were done by different database analysts once upon a time that can't cross-reference, you now have a consistent reference that cuts across the entire domain, makes it accessible. Interoperable, same feature, right? There's a consistent reference across all these. Suddenly, every instance of postal code is going to be using schema postal code. You're using schema postal code across these, regardless of what Scott did one day when he was in a bad mood and named it something crazy. It doesn't matter. It's still associated with schema postal code. And you can cross-reference these things now. And once you have access to the data, you can say, okay, now we can start looking for all the postal codes that are 19067, right? The risk of compromising confidentiality, that's mine. And then similarly with reusability, you can start reusing the data because you have a mechanism by which to cross-reference. So what I tried to accomplish with all this work is I started out with the DCAT stuff, and I had a problem to solve, and that is to promote discoverability. The DCAT stuff got me halfway there, maybe. But because the data is stuff that can't be exposed, I had to find a way to come up with something more. And it was a matter of realizing that if we can describe the shape of the data without ever exposing the data, we actually made it not all the way to fair data, but we made it a good way there without getting ourselves into a whole mess of legal trouble. And with that, I go quickly. I want to open it up to questions. Full disclosure, you asked me questions about Chase. I'm going to say I can't answer that question, but we can talk about military widget manufacturers all we like.
So here's a microphone.
Thank you. My question is about these IRIs.
Yes.
If you develop them, it will create consistency across domains. It's wonderful because it presents findability through the whole enterprise. What if you leave the company?
Well, presumably the IRIs don't leave with me. So if it was just me, that would be a problem, right? But that's just a matter of setting up an organization to maintain these. Am I understanding your question properly?
Yeah, so it's a dedicated group who would still need to be dedicated to maintain these IRIs and audit them, right?
So the short answer is yes. So anyone who tells you, oh, we're going to build an ontology and we'll be done, they don't understand ontologies, right? So yeah, it would, like any ontology, it would have to be built. There would be the care and feeding of it over a period of time. Obviously, the effort to build it's going to be a bit more of a, learning curve, or not learning curve, but a bit more of a effort, and then it'll flatten out. But yes, it would absolutely have to be maintained. And that applies to any ontology, or frankly, any vocabulary. Even for that matter, if you look at things like W3C standards, right? They're not one and done. They may not be updated as often as we might like, but they are updated on a fairly regular cadence. So yeah, that would have to happen here. Yeah.
So we have a few more questions. Pass the microphone. Excuse
So the beginning of your premise was about querying the data when you can't see it.
Right. And I'm cheating because we're not querying the data.
So you would never be able to do any sort of federated query across data without seeing it in the result.
Rephrase your question.
I guess what I'm getting at is we now can describe the data set and describe what the shape is.
Right.
But how are you able to draw conclusions if there's no way of querying the data without seeing it at that point, where you could see the result without it?
Right. So, right. Great question. So in what I've put together here, the short bad answer is you can't, because this is the mechanism by which you find the 3 data sets that are relevant to the job you want. Then you go beg up the food chain to get permission to actually look at them, right? And in so in the military, obviously, that may be a matter of getting a different clearance. But in the case of working in a medical environment, if there's patient data, HIPAA really restricts that. But if you have a critical business use case, you can get permission for those data sets to do it. Similarly in banking. So this is a way to get you to the right door, at least, or the right set of doors. But it doesn't do the whole job.
From my side, how do you get all the database owners to annotate their?
That's not easy, is the short answer. So it's a matter of having a fairly high level commitment at the company to modernizing the data, or whatever you want to call it. We call it modernizing. It's really a matter of having, that high level commitment at the C level to say, hey, look, we need to modernize the data. The thing that's helpful, at least in some cases, is frequently data has to move from one platform to another because the previous platform is becoming redundant, end of life, whatever. So there's frequently moments that you can sort of jump in there and try to interact with this. Unfortunately for me, I've aligned with one of those. But yeah, it's not, it really has to be a sort of a full court push from on high to make that stuff start happening.
We have one question from the online.
Sure.
This question is from Gresslin Amesting, and it says, thank you for this suggested presentation. I have one question on how you choose or decide which ontology to use in your mapping example of schema : address.
So I use schema in this example simply because schema is a publicly available ontology, and it illustrates the point. And schema is a shared ontology, so using it, from my mind, makes sense where it's applicable. But again, schema doesn't get very granular, except in oddly strange places. So one needs to take schema as a starting point and then develop their own ontology to cover the rest. So basically the approach that we've taken is, hey, if you can find it in schema and is granular enough to capture what you need, if it's a postal code, that's an excellent example. By all means, use that. If you need something about, weight of widget manufactured by military widget manufacturer, that's probably not going to be in schema. I'll tell you right now, it's not in schema. So you need to have your own ontology to capture the weight of the widget, for example, or whatever that is. So it's a matter of developing your own ontology. There's nothing magical about schema, but it's a de facto industry standard. And if you're trying to be standards compliant, which we are, using DCAT and so on, that's a good one to point at, even though it's not officially like a W3C standard. Yeah.
No?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. The previous question about how do you ask your database admins to,
Yes.
so have you considered using a data cataloging tool or platform or a data governance tool? Because those tools, like data governance, you have these processes embedded, right? Data stewards by domain, etc. That should help with the process. And also, maybe I assume wrongly, but I assume like in a large company like yours, there are such tools that are already in place. So what is the reason for in your own system versus using one of these platforms?
You've crushed the area where I have to say I can't answer your question. But what I can say is this: In a large bank, or any large organization, especially one that grows by acquisition, which banks tend to do, there's never one system. There's always 19, and trying to pick one, so not always 19, but trying to pick one when there's a bunch of competition within it is just inviting another political fight, which I'd rather not have. So that's the short personal response.
You add another one.
No, I'm not adding another. I'm not adding another one. In this case, it's more of a manual process. Could one do that? Yes. Is that something we're considering? No comment. So. There. Okay.
My question was like extension of the question he asked actually, because keeping up to track of everything in terms of ontology is a little massive and time consuming process, especially compared to like how applications data is growing in different silo divisions, and considering the ontology, which is the way towards the data centricity, is how do we realistically keep track of things in sync, like to be, fully be data centric and getting into the knowledge graph work?
Stop me if I've misunderstood your question. So setting up a central ontology team that maintains this and is tightly coupled with the data publishing process, which I didn't talk about a lot, but the data publishing process is really important, and having transparency across that process so that people can clearly see what happened during the data publishing process and what the result was of the data publishing process, which ultimately leverages the metadata in some sort of catalog, maintains a level of transparency. Now, I don't know if I fully answered your question, but it's a matter of setting up the business processes and staffing it accordingly is the short, bad answer. Yes.
Talked about fair, findable.
Yes.
Talk to how it's not just achieved from the bottom pushing up, but also the executives coming and pushing down at the same time, and how that impacts governance, and then inevitably things like Gen AI and LLM.
Oh boy. Okay. I'll answer part of your question because I can't answer all of it in less than an hour. Push from the top down is absolutely critical. I can look at colleagues from former lives I've had, and they can tell you that doing this from the bottom up in terms of an organization is a great way to get kneecapped somewhere along the way. This is a big initiative, big effort. It requires alignment across a lot of different groups and a lot of different divisions of companies. Without executive support and clear messaging from the top, it doesn't happen. It simply can't. I've tried it multiple places and it never worked. So that's absolutely critical. As for the integration with other things, you're absolutely right. There is a governance tie-in here. So the one thing I mentioned is once you have XSD types, you can do some data quality stuff. That's intersecting in almost every corporation I know of with the governance role, right? And it's really important to obviously to play well with others and make sure you get that alignment. There's a lot of opportunity with this kind of thing to interact, and I don't want to say expand the footprint, but interact with and mesh with other business functions, governance being a huge one. And I know there are certain people, including you, who sell software that actually do that. So I know why you asked the question. And it's absolutely a fair question. There's a lot of opportunity here. For the purposes of this conversation, I would sort of focus it. So not a great answer, sorry, Walt, but.
You integrated several different data catalogs with the DCAT model. Is that fairly interoperable? Does this help make data catalogs interoperable?
Data catalogs, plural. I can't answer that. Different data sets and multiple distributions of them, yes. Because what you can then do is you can expose them in a single findability environment, a marketplace, if you will. Could one have multiple data catalogs going to the same marketplace? I suppose so. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. Because if you could, effectively the marketplace is going to be itself a manifestation of the whole catalog. Presumably you get all your ducks lined up, right? So, but I suppose you could have things coming from different areas that are managed entirely differently and view those as different catalogs.
Great to be able to have visibility on the entire solution architecture, different companies coming together or any acquisitions, that kind of thing.
Yeah, with acquisitions, it's an interesting challenge, but that,
The only reason I asked is I'm gonna explore that. What's the, how well adopted DCAT is in general as a standard?
oh, I see. I can't really comment on how well DCAT is as a standard. I mean, for what I'm doing, it's a very important thing that we're hanging stuff off of. You know, and DCAT does a great job because it cross-references other standards, right? There's a number of other W3C standards that it cross-references. In fact, a lot of the terms that you use while using DCAT are things like Dublin core terms, right? Which is cool, so.
Yes, one last question from the online audience we have. This is Rashmi Rajaguru asking, how do you keep things on to date since applications, databases versus ontology modeling?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
That's all I got from the chat as well. So I guess like, you know, I wish that Rashmi has provided more context and content to the question. So.
This was my question, I already asked that.
Okay, so that's great. Then we are done now. Then, is there any further questions? And please have a round of applause to.
That was a lovely.